The ID card clattered onto the marble floor, with a cold, sharp echo that reverberated through the Sterling financial lobby. Anderson Mitchell, the bank's senior manager, had tossed the ID of a black woman in her 60s onto the ground as if it were trash. "Sorry, but documents like these don't inspire any confidence," Anderson sneered, straightening his Italian tie as he watched her stoop to retrieve it. "Perhaps you should find a bank better suited to your profile." Olivia Johnson lingered on her knees for a moment, lifting the card with steady hands that didn't tremble in the slightest. At 60, she carried herself like someone who had faced storms far more formidable than the arrogance of a young executive. As she stood, her gaze met Anderson's with unsettling calm. Other customers were drawn to the scene. An elegant woman whispered to her husband and discreetly pointed toward Olivia. Two men in suits paused their conversation to watch. The lobby was so hushed that even the hum of the air conditioning seemed amplified. Olivia Johnson straightened her coat, slipped the card into her handbag with measured grace, and raised her voice, remarkably composed. "Thank you for clarifying how Sterling Financial values its customers." Without waiting for his reply, she turned and walked out of the main hall, her posture both resolute and serene. Onlookers couldn't help but feel a mix of admiration and curiosity at her extraordinary poise. Behind her, Anderson stood frozen for a heartbeat, visibly unsettled by her calm. But within seconds he recovered his swagger, a faint, dismissive smile playing on his lips, as if this had all been nothing more than a trivial, harmless incident. The moment Olivia's figure disappeared through the glass doors, Andrew let out a mocking smirk and deliberately raised his voice, as if worried the other patrons hadn't heard what just happened. "I just don't get it. Does someone like her really think she can be a client of Sterling Financial? This bank isn't for anyone who strolls in off the street with an outdated ID, cheap clothes, and the nerve to think she's on par with our VIPs." Andrew swept his gaze across the lobby, hungry for approving looks from the more upscale customers. A few politely averted their eyes, pretending not to have heard, while others watched in silence. Whether in agreement or discomfort, it was impossible to tell. "Paula," he turned to his young assistant standing beside him, pride dripping from his tone. "You've been here long enough to know we can't let our bank's elite image be tarnished by clients like that." Paula Evans, just over 30, froze in place, her eyes cast down toward the marble floor where Olivia had stooped to pick up her ID moments before. In Paula's mind replayed Olivia's unsettlingly calm, steely gaze as she left the bank. Her heart pounded so fiercely she felt breathless, yet she dared not speak up. Andrew wasn't someone you challenged lightly, especially not an assistant. He was notorious for his domineering arrogance, convinced his instincts were infallible. Seeing Paula's silence, Andrew arched an eyebrow, his voice softening just enough to cut with sarcasm. "You know, Paula, in this high-end banking world, instinct rules everything. And my instinct is always right. That woman clearly doesn't belong here." He straightened his expensive silk tie, satisfied by Paula's obedient quiet. But beneath his confidence, a strange unease was stirring. Not regret, but frustration at his inability to read the older woman as easily as he did every other client. That was rare for Andrew. Since entering private banking nearly a decade ago, he prided himself on sizing up a prospect within seconds. To him, potential meant impeccable attire, costly jewelry, and that unmistakable air of entitlement worn by those born into privilege. So, a simple-dressed older woman like Olivia Johnson was an affront to the standards he held sacrosanct. Clearing his throat, Andrew turned back to the other patrons, smoothly inquiring about their needs, as if to reaffirm his professionalism. Yet, in his mind, he kept returning to the image of the black woman he had so publicly dismissed. Meanwhile, outside on the sunlit sidewalk, Olivia paused and drew in a long, steady breath. Not to calm herself, but to steel her resolve. Her eyes, sharp and unwavering, reflected the strength she'd summoned through countless trials. She reached into her handbag, produced her phone with unshakable certainty, and quickly typed a brief message. "Jessica, I need to talk to you about Sterling Financial. It's urgent." With a tap, the text flew off. Olivia slipped her phone away and lifted her gaze to the clear blue sky. In her expression lay serenity, latent power, and an unspoken promise that Andrew Mitchell's contempt today would cost him far more than he could ever imagine. The moment her message sent, Olivia slipped into the waiting car. The doors closed, enclosing her in a bubble of calm that stood in stark contrast to the tense, stifling air she'd just endured inside Sterling Financial. Her eyes rested on the glass door even as her mind turned to a brand new plan, one that would force those who had insulted her into re-examining all their false assumptions. A few neighborhoods away, on the 51st floor of the Johnson Global Tower, Jessica Johnson, young, brilliant, and powerful CEO, sat with her senior team, putting the final touches on a $5 billion partnership with none other than Sterling Financial, the very bank that had so deeply wounded her mother. Light from the floor-to-ceiling windows illuminated Jessica's face, highlighting the resolve and confidence befitting the head of a billion-dollar enterprise. Her phone buzzed softly. Jessica glanced down to see her mother's text. Surprised, Olivia rarely interrupted her during important meetings. A pang of unease made Jessica signal for a brief pause. She rose and hurried into the hallway, her heart pounding with a strange anticipation. Without hesitation, Jessica called her mother back. After a few rings, Olivia's calm voice answered, though Jessica detected a rare tremor. "Jessica, you need to hear me out. This morning I went to Sterling Financial to open that business account you recommended. I had the worst, most disappointing experience there." Jessica's brow furrowed. She gripped her phone tighter, her voice urgent yet controlled. "Mom, what happened? Tell me everything." Taking a steady breath, Olivia recounted every detail, from Andrew Mitchell's disdainful attitude and public insult to his arrogant, hostile behavior. Each word cut into Jessica like a blade, tightening her chest with anger and hurt on her mother's behalf. When Olivia finished, there was a long silence on Jessica's end. She stood motionless on the plush carpet of the corridor, but inside her a storm of fury raged. The gravity of the situation was crystal clear. Sterling Financial hadn't just insulted her mother. They'd insulted the values Johnson Global was built upon: respect and fairness. "Jessica," Olivia continued, her voice stronger now, "I'm not telling you this so you'll pity me. I want you to understand how this partner treats real customers, judging someone purely on appearance. Are these really the people you want to entrust with our business and billions of dollars?" Jessica closed her eyes for a moment to steady herself. When she reopened them, her gaze was colder and sharper than ever before. With unwavering certainty, she replied, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll handle this today. I will never let them humiliate you like that. Never." After hanging up, Jessica remained in the hallway for a long moment, her hand still clenched around her phone. She realized now that the $5 billion deal with Sterling Financial was about far more than business. It was a battle to defend her family's dignity, and she would not let it slip away. Across town, Andrew Mitchell, completely unaware of the undercurrent building against him, remained smug and self-satisfied, convinced that his morning stunt was no more than a trivial hiccup. Soon enough, however, he would be forced to confront a harsh truth. The woman he had just demeaned was the mother of the most important partner of his career, and the price he would pay would be far greater than anything he could imagine. While Jessica stood frozen in the hallway, her resolve steeling for the battle ahead, Andrew Mitchell was casually enjoying lunch with his senior colleagues in the elegant restaurant on Sterling Financial's top floor, his face alight with the satisfaction of wielding absolute power. Seated at the center of a long table draped in crisp white linen, surrounded by co-workers eager to shower him with praise, Andrew slowly set down his glass of red wine and launched into his tale with exaggerated disdain. "You should have seen it," he began, voice dripping with contempt. An elderly woman, dressed like she wandered in from rural nowhere, walked into our Sterling Financial branch thinking she could open a premium business account with nothing more than her outdated ID. Guess what I did? He paused, sweeping the table with his eyes as if expecting his audience to lean in. A few smirked, others raised eyebrows waiting for the punchline. "I threw her ID card on the floor," Andrew declared, deliberately amplifying the drama. "You know, sometimes you have to be ruthless to protect the bank's image and standards. I was just safeguarding Sterling Financial's reputation." He laughed, as if he'd just recounted the finest joke. His laughter rang louder than the soft music and clinking crystal, and several at the table joined in, flattering him as though he'd scored some glorious victory. Beside him, Paula Evans sat silently, head bowed, idly twirling her fork through her salad. She felt her stomach churn. Andrew's words stabbed at her like knives. It wasn't the first time she'd witnessed her boss's arrogance and discriminatory behavior, but she'd never felt such disgust as she did now. She could still see the calm dignity in Olivia Johnson's eyes as she bent to retrieve her card from the marble floor. That quiet strength told Paula Andrew was making a grave mistake, one that ran deeper than mere personal offense. Yet, no matter how outraged she felt, Paula dared not speak. She knew Andrew's temperament too well. He accepted no dissent, however mild. Anyone who crossed him ended up quietly leaving the bank. So she remained silent, eyes fixed on her plate, feeling weak and powerless as Andrew's cruel, bigoted boasting filled the room. Andrew, fueled by the applause, leaned forward with a smug, scornful gleam in his eyes. "Trust me, you can spot a real potential client in seconds. That instinct never fails. That woman clearly didn't belong here. Sterling Financial isn't for everyone. We have higher standards." Laughter erupted once more. Andrew leaned back, raised his wine glass again, and drained it like he'd just sealed an important triumph. What he didn't know, and could never imagine, was that his arrogance and overtly racist contempt were about to ignite a major crisis, one powerful enough to strip him of everything he'd ever prided himself on. Outside the restaurant's windows, the once clear sky was gathering slate-gray clouds, as though foreshadowing the storm Andrew Mitchell had himself summoned, and of which he remained blissfully unaware. While Andrew sat back smugly, casually sipping wine with his colleagues in the upscale restaurant, across town Olivia Johnson had arrived at her modest apartment and begun acting with quiet but resolute purpose. Seated at her simple desk, lit only by the soft glow of a battered desk lamp, Olivia opened her laptop. Her reflection on the screen was calm, but her eyes burned with an extraordinary determination. Everyone who knew Olivia assumed she was a humble, gentle woman. Few realized the depth of her past. Long before her daughter Jessica Johnson became the celebrated CEO of Johnson Global, Olivia had been a self-made entrepreneur who overcame decades of hardship, prejudice, and bias to build her own successful business. In her youth, she endured scornful remarks and dismissive glances because of her background and skin color. Yet she never let anything or anyone stand in her way. Those painful experiences forged in her an unbreakable will, profound self-respect, and an uncanny ability to spot discrimination, no matter how well disguised. Now, at her worn laptop, her fingers moved swiftly and decisively. Within minutes, she was deep into files and records she knew would prove what her instincts told her from her first encounter with Andrew Mitchell, that he was not only arrogant but had a long, hidden history of racial bias. She traced his digital footprints across social media, uncovering comments, posts, and seemingly innocuous updates laced with contempt for anyone outside his wealthy circle. Through discreet contacts with his former colleagues, she obtained internal emails revealing Andrew's use of derogatory language in private exchanges, underscoring his obsession with maintaining the bank's elite standards in blatantly discriminatory terms. Piece by piece, the evidence formed a complete picture of the man who publicly humiliated her that morning. Olivia methodically copied every post and email into secure, well-organized folders. Her eyes no longer reflected hurt or disappointment, but the unwavering resolve of someone intent on defending her dignity. When her research was complete, Olivia leaned back in her chair, eyes fixed on the screen even as her thoughts turned to the upcoming meeting with Jessica and the company's legal team. She held in her hands the strongest, most irrefutable proof of Andrew Mitchell's true character and the bank's complicity in his behavior. A latent power, long dormant, stirred within her. Outside her apartment window, the night was settling in and city lights began to twinkle. But in Olivia's modest room, the only light was her small desk lamp, casting her face in a resolute glow. Sterling Financial and Andrew Mitchell had no idea that their arrogance and bigotry had crossed the path of the one woman who had spent her life battling and triumphing over the very prejudices they wielded so carelessly. The moment Olivia finished gathering the last piece of evidence, her phone lit up and rang softly in the small room. It was Jessica, her voice urgent yet resolute. "Mom, I've called in our legal team at headquarters. I think we need to act now. I'll pick you up in about 15 minutes. True to her word, just minutes later, Olivia was seated beside her daughter in a sleek car, heading straight for the Johnson Global offices. They rode in silence, but their eyes said everything. Olivia looked at Jessica and saw her younger self reflected in those determined eyes. Jessica understood that the fight ahead was about far more than business. It was a matter of principle, honor, and the family's dignity. The emergency meeting convened in the company's largest conference room, a luxurious space with floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooking the city's glittering skyline. Johnson Global's most senior attorneys arrived promptly, their faces grave, ready to listen. As Olivia and Jessica entered, the room's tension tightened. Olivia opened her laptop, connected it to the big screen, and calmly began displaying each piece of evidence she'd painstakingly compiled that afternoon. Every email, every comment and public statement by Andrew Mitchell appeared in turn, painting a stark, alarming portrait of his discriminatory mindset. The room fell deathly quiet as lead counsel Richard Bennett, who had handled hundreds of complex cases, absorbed the proof before him. His sharp eyes scanned each document, his expression shifting from surprise to shock to barely concealed outrage. He shook his head, sighed, and turned to Olivia, his voice heavy with concern. "I've practiced law for over 30 years, and I've rarely seen such clear-cut, brazen evidence. This manager's actions and words could do severe damage to Sterling Financial's image and reputation." Jessica nodded, her gaze colder and more determined than ever. "And it would severely damage our reputation if Johnson Global were to partner with a bank like that. We can't ignore this." Bennett agreed without hesitation and presented a thick dossier of legal briefs related to the pending contract. The attorneys immediately began poring over every clause, seeking every legal avenue to terminate the $5 billion partnership with Sterling Financial without exposing the company to any liability. While the legal team worked intensely, Olivia sat quietly, watching the screen still showing her evidence. She thought of Andrew's arrogant smirk as he'd thrown her ID card to the floor. A quiet but fierce anger rose in her, pushing her to see this through to the end. Jessica noticed and gently laid her hand over her mother's. Her voice was soft but powerful. "Don't worry, Mom. We won't let this go. They have no idea who they've just insulted." Olivia nodded, a wave of relief washing over her at having her daughter by her side. Life had taught her a vital lesson. True strength doesn't lie in wealth or outward power, but in the willingness to stand up for one's dignity and honor, especially when unjustly attacked. Under the bright conference room lights, faces resolute, the city outside continued its bustling pace. But inside that room, a perfect plan of retribution was taking shape, ready to deliver a seismic shock to Andrew Mitchell and Sterling Financial, one born of the very arrogance and contempt they assumed would never cost them a thing. The moment Olivia finished gathering the final pieces of evidence, her phone lit up and rang softly in the small room. It was Jessica, her voice urgent but unwavering. "Mom, I've called in our legal team at headquarters. We need to move now. I'll pick you up in about 15 minutes. True to her word, just minutes later, Olivia sat beside her daughter in a sleek car, heading straight for the Johnson Global office tower. The drive was silent, but their eyes spoke volumes. Olivia looked at Jessica and saw her younger self reflected in her daughter's resolute gaze. Jessica knew that the battle ahead wasn't just about business. It was about principle, honor, and their family's dignity. The emergency meeting took place in the company's largest conference room, a luxurious space with floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooking the city's glittering lights. Johnson Global's most senior attorneys arrived promptly, their faces grave and ready to listen. As Olivia and Jessica entered, the room's tension ratcheted up. Olivia opened her laptop, confidently connected it to the big screen, and began revealing each piece of evidence she had painstakingly assembled all afternoon. Every email, every comment and public statement by Andrew Mitchell appeared in turn, painting a stark, alarming portrait of his discriminatory mindset. The room fell utterly silent as lead counsel Richard Bennett, who had handled hundreds of complex cases, stared at the screen. His sharp eyes scanned each document. His expression shifted from surprise to shock to barely restrained anger. He shook his head, sighed, and turned to Olivia, his voice grave. "I've practiced law for over 30 years, and I've rarely seen evidence so clear and brazen. This manager's actions and statements could inflict serious damage on Sterling Financial's reputation." Jessica nodded, her gaze colder and more determined than ever. "And it would do serious damage to our reputation if Johnson Global proceeded with a partner like that. We cannot ignore this." Bennett agreed and immediately produced a dossier of legal briefs pertaining to the pending contract. The attorneys pored over every clause, looking for any legal basis to terminate the $5 billion partnership with Sterling Financial without exposing the company to liability. While the legal team worked intensely, Olivia sat quietly, her eyes fixed on the screen still displaying her evidence. She thought of Andrew's arrogant smirk as he'd thrown her ID to the floor. A quiet but fierce anger swelled within her, urging her to see this through to the end. Jessica sensed her mother's resolve and gently placed a hand over Olivia's. Her voice was soft but powerful. "Don't worry, Mom. We won't let this slide. They have no idea whom they've just insulted." Olivia nodded, relief washing over her at having her daughter by her side. Life had taught her a crucial lesson. True strength lies not in wealth or outward power, but in the willingness to stand up for one's dignity and honor, especially when wronged unjustly. Under the bright conference room lights, faces alight with determination, the city outside continued its bustling pace. But inside that room, a perfect plan of retribution was quietly taking shape, one that would deliver a seismic shock to Andrew Mitchell and Sterling Financial, born of the very arrogance and contempt they believed would cost them nothing. The air in the conference room felt thick and heavy, broken only by the steady hum of the air conditioner, cold as Andrew Mitchell's fate in that moment. He stood frozen like a statue, terror mounting as Jessica's stern gaze bore into him. Andrew realized instantly that this was no ordinary tense meeting. It was the moment that would decide his entire career and future. Jessica calmly opened the heavy dossier on the table, her movements deliberate and full of authority. Her icy eyes met Andrew's, and in that brief instant he felt as though she could see right through every secret and weakness he had tried so hard to conceal. "Mr. Mitchell," Jessica began, her voice cold and resolute, echoing like an irreversible verdict. "Johnson Global chooses its partners based on clear principles and ethical values. After what transpired, I am deeply disappointed to inform you that we will immediately terminate our $5 billion contract with Sterling Financial." A chill ran down Andrew's spine, and his body shook. Jessica's words struck his pride and confidence like heavy stones. Panic seized him, and he rushed forward, his voice trembling with desperation. "Miss Johnson, please let me explain. It's all a terrible misunderstanding. I had no idea she was your mother. If I had known, I would never have done that." Jessica remained silent, her cold stare unwavering. Then Olivia spoke, each word sharp and charged with the strength of decades of self-respect. "Andrew, that is irrelevant. Whether I am Jessica's mother is beside the point. What matters is that I entered your bank as a customer, and you chose to insult me because of my simple appearance and skin color." Olivia paused, her eyes reflecting deep disappointment rather than anger. She continued, voice calm but unwavering. "When you threw my ID card on the floor, when you publicly mocked me in front of your clients, you sealed the fate of Sterling Financial and your own. You chose discrimination over the basic respect every person deserves." Each of Olivia's words cut into Andrew like a blade, leaving him paralyzed, his mind reeling. The incidents he dismissed as harmless jests came back now in bitter, agonizing clarity. In utter desperation, forgetting his rank and any shred of pride, Andrew fell to his knees. "Miss Johnson, please give me a chance. I am truly sorry for what I did. Don't cancel this contract. It will destroy my career." Olivia looked at him coolly, her expression untouched by his pleas. She simply shook her head, replying in a calm but emphatic tone. "Your career was destroyed not by our decision, but by your own discriminatory actions and attitude. Johnson Global cannot, and will not, align itself with such flawed ethics." Jessica placed a reassuring hand on her mother's shoulder, affirming their unshakable choice. She stood, gesturing to the legal team to finalize the termination. Andrew watched in helpless despair as it unfolded, overwhelmed by shame and humiliation. In mere minutes, he had lost everything: his career, his reputation, his pride. All he had believed was unbreakable. The conference room door closed behind them, leaving Andrew alone in the vast, silent space, watching Olivia and Jessica depart. Only then did he fully comprehend the harshest truth of his life. Arrogance and discrimination are never signs of strength, but fatal weaknesses capable of destroying everything one has built. The moment the conference room door closed behind Olivia and Jessica, Andrew stood alone in the sudden hush, feeling the world shatter into 1,000 pieces around him. He could barely breathe. His legs wobbled and his hands trembled as he gripped the back of a chair to stay upright. Everything had happened so swiftly, so brutally, but deep down, Andrew knew he'd brought this calamity upon himself. Not 10 minutes later, the door opened again. In stepped Michael Carter, Sterling Financial's CEO, wearing an expression of unprecedented severity. His sharp eyes fixed on Andrew, brimming with barely contained disappointment and anger. "Mitchell," Carter said, his tone icy and absolute, "are you aware of the damage you've just inflicted on Sterling Financial? In over 30 years in this business, I've never seen such reckless irresponsibility." Andrew tried to speak, but no words came. He understood that any explanation would be meaningless now. Losing that $5 billion deal wasn't merely a financial setback. It was a direct assault on Sterling Financial's reputation as a premium, trustworthy institution. The executive team convened an emergency meeting as soon as they learned what happened. Carter continued, eyes never leaving Andrew. "And we've decided to terminate your employment effective immediately. All your benefits and positions at Sterling Financial end now." Each word cut into Andrew like a blade, stripping away everything he'd believed was permanent. He said nothing, only bowed his head in bitter shame. He knew this was the price for his arrogance, bigotry, and contempt, an unimaginable cost he had never foreseen. Within hours, the news spread throughout the financial world, far beyond Sterling Financial's walls. Major business publications, social media, and all news outlets seized on the scandal. Headlines screamed, "Sterling Financial loses historic $5 billion deal over racism," and the business community and public alike reacted with outrage. Sterling Financial was immediately bombarded with fierce criticism. Its stock price plunged in record fashion. Long-standing clients began to question their relationships, fearing brand damage if they remained tied to an institution mired in an ethics and human rights crisis. As Sterling Financial scrambled to manage the fallout, Andrew quietly packed his belongings from the office that once symbolized his power and status. Co-workers watched him pass down the hallway with looks of scorn and curiosity. None spoke a word. Even Paula, his assistant who had long witnessed his arrogance and cruelty, regarded him now with cold indifference. Finally, Andrew stepped out onto the busy city street, clutching a small box of personal items. Just that morning, he'd believed himself on the brink of his greatest triumph, poised to bask in the glory and influence of a billion-dollar contract. Now he stood alone among the hustling crowds, his only companions overwhelming shame, regret, and despair. In that moment, Andrew understood a painful truth. Everything he'd lost, his career, his wealth, his reputation, and the trust of others, was not taken from him by anyone else, but was the inevitable consequence of the arrogance and contempt he had once worn as badges of pride. And now he was paying the ultimate price, a price that taught him there is no greater mistake than pride coupled with prejudice. The days that followed were heavy and bleak, like the overcast sky above the cramped apartment Andrew was forced to move into after losing his job at Sterling Financial. From the pinnacle of prestige, he plummeted straight into the abyss of unemployment, where the doors of opportunity he had once confidently flung open with an arrogant smile now slammed shut one after another before him. At first, Andrew stubbornly clung to the hope that, with his impressive resume and industry connections, he could easily land another position at a different bank or corporation. But each interview only delivered fresh bitterness as he was met with polite refusals. The financial sector never forgives serious ethical lapses, and the name Andrew Mitchell had become synonymous with racism, a stigma no firm wanted to touch. Day after day, he returned to his empty apartment in a state of dejection, sitting wordlessly before his computer as his inbox filled with cold, courteous rejections. His former self-esteem and confidence had been completely replaced by despair and regret. Long into the night he would replay that fateful morning in his mind, the sneer with which he'd thrown Olivia's ID to the floor, the cruel taunts he'd used to mock her. With each recollection, his heart twisted, shame flooding through him as though he were executing his own sentence anew each day. The once opulent life he'd enjoyed now existed only in fading memories, supplanted by days of struggle, isolation, and hardship. Gone were the lavish lunches on high floors. Andrew could now afford only simple, convenience store meals. He avoided the gaze of former acquaintances and steered clear of the streets and cafes where he once flaunted his wealth and power. Yet the most painful loss was the confrontation with himself, acknowledging the brutal truth that he had destroyed everything he'd built. One afternoon, while wandering aimlessly through the city, he happened upon a prominent business magazine cover featuring Olivia and Jessica, the headline proclaiming, "Johnson Global signs historic $5.3 billion deal with Commonwealth National." Andrew froze, the ache in his chest sharper than ever. He realized that his own arrogance and bigotry had inadvertently empowered his rivals, strengthening the very people he had insulted. Those successes should have belonged to Sterling Financial, if only he had shown Olivia the respect every person deserves. From that moment on, Andrew understood a vital lesson. What he once saw as strengths, coldness, arrogance, and discrimination, were actually his fatal flaws, the root cause of his irreversible downfall. He wondered if he could turn back time, would he still dare to look at Olivia with contempt, or would he change his attitude and actions entirely? But time does not rewind. Andrew was left living in profound regret, torturing himself daily over the brilliant career he'd foolishly lost. And in the desperate silence of his small, dark apartment, he finally grasped that discrimination not only destroys its victims, it inevitably returns to destroy the perpetrator. While Andrew sank ever deeper into the darkness of regret and remorse, on the top floor of Johnson Global's headquarters, brilliant lights were illuminating a promising new chapter. The historic $5.3 billion contract with Commonwealth National, a renowned bank celebrated for its human-centered business principles and professional ethics, had just been signed. The signing ceremony unfolded in a formal yet warmly collegial atmosphere. With the media looking on, Jessica Johnson and Olivia Johnson sat side by side and affixed their signatures to the critical document. Applause rang out in admiration, a clear testament to the respect both organizations' employees held for these two remarkable women. Immediately afterward, David Richardson, chairman of Commonwealth National, took the podium, visibly moved as he addressed the assembled guests and staff. Johnson Global is more than just our strategic partner today. They stand as a living symbol of integrity, compassion, and the ethical business values we strive for. The presence of Mrs. Olivia Johnson alongside CEO Jessica Johnson proves that respect for human dignity is the very foundation on which we prosper together. His words deeply moved everyone in the room. Olivia, her face a blend of emotion and pride, rose slowly to speak. Her warm, clear voice carried across the space. "I have faced countless hardships and endured prejudice simply because of my background and skin color. Yet those challenges taught me one vital lesson. A person's worth can never be judged by appearance or origin, but only by their character and tangible contributions." Olivia turned to Jessica with a proud smile. "I am so proud that my daughter, Jessica, has built Johnson Global on these very values, and I am equally honored that Commonwealth National stands with us as a partner, sharing the core principles we hold dear. Shortly after the ceremony, Olivia Johnson officially joined Johnson Global as strategic advisor. Her presence brought not only invaluable business experience, but also embodied the ethical standards and human values that earned her special respect across the finance industry. In the months that followed, Johnson Global surged ahead, solidifying its market-leading position. Olivia played a key role in shaping corporate culture, training employees in diversity, respect, and empathy. Business partners and clients alike were struck by her poise, wisdom, and the profound humanity she conveyed in every workshop and public appearance. Before long, prestigious business organizations honored Olivia as an icon of courage, integrity, and resilience. The woman once publicly insulted now stood atop the most illustrious podiums, inspiring countless entrepreneurs and young professionals. By contrast, Sterling Financial sank further into crisis and never recovered its former stature. Andrew, who once believed arrogance was power, could only watch from afar, bitter as he witnessed Olivia's triumphant rise. Yet Olivia never once spoke of revenge or revisited past slights with bitterness. Instead, she quietly strengthened Johnson Global's success, proving that true power does not lie in punishing one's enemies but in rising above one's wounds, demonstrating to the world that self-respect and kindness are the surest paths to enduring, meaningful success. With Johnson Global and Commonwealth National's resounding success, Olivia Johnson's name had transcended finance, becoming an emblem of resilience, self-respect, and fairness in business. So it was no surprise when she was invited as the keynote speaker at this year's National Banking Conference. What set this keynote apart, however, was the story she was about to share, one that had once sent shockwaves through the industry and forced many to rethink professional ethics. On the morning of the conference, Olivia stepped onto the stage in a simple yet elegant outfit, her posture composed and confident, her eyes reflecting both experience and wisdom. The spotlight illuminated her face, and as the auditorium fell silent, every pair of eyes turned expectantly toward her. In the back row sat Andrew Mitchell, the man responsible for the greatest upheaval of her career. Gone was his old arrogance. His hair was streaked with gray, his ill-fitting suit a sign of his fall from grace. He clutched a small notebook filled with notes on insurance products, the only work he'd secured after a series of failures. As Olivia's gaze slowly swept the audience, Andrew instinctively lowered his head, his heart pounding. Shame, bitterness, and regret welled up inside him stronger than ever when he realized he was now just another anonymous face in the crowd, listening to the woman he once scorned recount a story in which he was the villain. Olivia began her address with calm deliberation, her voice gentle yet powerful. Today, I will share a true story about respect and the serious consequences of misjudging another person's worth. Not long ago, I walked into Sterling Financial as an ordinary customer, seeking to open a business account. What I received was not respect, but deep contempt. The audience sat rapt, as if stepping into Olivia's memory. Andrew, huddled in his corner, trembled as she continued in a steady, vivid narrative. The branch manager that day judged me by my appearance and the color of my skin. He threw my ID card to the floor in front of a room full of customers as though it were trash. That one action not only hurt me deeply, it cost Sterling Financial a $5 billion contract and tarnished a reputation built over decades. Hearing this, Andrew felt 100 stares burning into him, even though no one actually looked his way. He bowed his head further, clutching his notebook so tightly his hand shook. Then Olivia pressed on, not with anger, but with a pointed ethical lesson. I don't share this story for personal vengeance. I share it so we all understand that every decision we make at work must rest on basic human respect. When we misjudge someone's value based on appearance, skin color, or any bias, we pay a far steeper price than we could ever imagine." Thunderous applause erupted across the hall, but Andrew barely heard it. His mind was consumed by guilt. He realized it was never Olivia who destroyed him, but his own actions. Her words weren't meant to deepen his suffering. They were a vital lesson, a harsh truth he had to face. When the conference ended, Andrew quietly slipped out of the auditorium, each step toward the exit heavy with regret. Outside, the sky remained a clear blue, yet inside him it felt cold and gray. He paused for a moment at the threshold, glancing back at the stage where Olivia continued to receive admiration. In that fleeting instant, Andrew grasped a profound truth. His greatest mistake wasn't losing the contract, his reputation, or his career. It was losing respect for another human being, the one value that, once gone, can never be reclaimed. The moment Andrew stepped out of the auditorium, the room fell back into attentive silence. Olivia remained steady on the stage, her calm, gentle eyes sweeping over the hundreds of faces turned toward her, waiting for her to close this special address with its most important message. At that moment, no one knew that the man who had once wounded her so deeply had quietly slipped away, carrying bitterness and regret with him for life. Olivia glanced around the hall and spoke in a soft yet immensely powerful voice, drawing strength from her own hard-earned experiences. "I know many of us still believe that true power lies in authority, money, dominance, or looking down on others. But the story I've shared today is not about that kind of power. It's about a very different and far more enduring strength, the power born of dignity, compassion, and resilience." Her words rang clear and true in every listener's heart. They understood that she wasn't just speaking about herself, but for everyone who has ever been hurt by prejudice or contempt. We often mistake kindness for weakness and think resilience means simply withstanding hardship, Olivia continued, her eyes shining with resolve. But I stand before you today to affirm this. Real strength is found when we honor one another's humanity, when we are strong enough to treat everyone with sincerity and humility. She paused for a moment, her tone dropping to a solemn whisper. The saddest part of the sterling financial story isn't the financial loss, nor the shattered reputation. It's how an institution once proud of its values allowed one individual's discrimination and lack of respect to undo it all. A fresh wave of applause filled the room, this time louder, more heartfelt. Olivia smiled gently and nodded in gratitude to those who truly grasped her message. Before long, the tale of Sterling Financial and Andrew Mitchell became a living lesson across the finance industry, a clear warning of the dire consequences prejudice and disrespect can unleash. Major banks launched new training programs focused on professional ethics, diversity, and human respect. Workshops and seminars began using Andrew Mitchell's story as a cautionary example, a stern reminder that no one has the right to diminish another's worth. As for Olivia, she continued her role as strategic advisor at Johnson Global, emerging as the finance world's most inspiring advocate for ethical leadership and compassion. She never spoke of Andrew with bitterness or vengeance. Instead, she treated that old wound as a teaching moment, showing that positive change can spring from our deepest mistakes. Meanwhile, Andrew remained cloaked in regret and remorse. Yet, gradually, Olivia's profound lessons became his only fragile hope for rebuilding his life. He began to change how he viewed the world, how he treated clients, and how he saw himself. It may have been too late for a career revival, but at least he finally understood the core message Olivia sought to convey. True strength never comes from belittling others. It always comes from respect and human dignity. Only then is the success we achieve truly solid and meaningful. Thank you for joining us on this special journey. Through Olivia Johnson's story, we learn a powerful lesson. Real strength springs from respect, compassion, and human dignity, not from looking down on others. What about you? Have you ever witnessed or experienced something similar? How would you have handled it? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video, share this meaningful story with others, and subscribe so we can spread these values together. We'll see you next time for more stories that matter.